Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome inside the Guilty as Charged podcast, coming to you live on a very late Wednesday evening. Thank you for joining us in the chat for your nightcap tonight, and excited to dive into all the coaching news tonight. Obviously, the Chargers moving on from Joe Lombardi and Shane Day, as well as Michael Wilhoit, and obviously the decision to retain, Mr. Brandon Staley. So we're going to dive into everything tonight regarding the Chargers coaching staff. And at the end of the show, we'll give our top 5 candidates for the Chargers offensive coordinator position. So should be a fun one. Joining me are my guys, Tyler and Alex. Alex, we'll start with you. It's 1 a.m. local time for you. But how you doing?
Yeah, it is 1 a.m. So let's do the podcast. And also Tyler's coworkers who scheduled that meeting, I don't know, maybe inform him of the meeting sooner next time. But we're here, 1 a.m. Got a lot of stuff to talk about, so let's go.
Yeah, at some point, Alex will have to, we'll be able to stop being awake at 1 a.m. local time to record podcasts. So, but so appreciate it. Hey, man, this is late for me. So 1 a.m. I can't even imagine. So genuinely appreciate you staying awake this far. Tyler is here as well, man. Tyler, what's up? How you doing?
I'm so sorry, Alex. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
It was going to be 3 because I needed it to be 3. Then it needed to be 9 because I needed it to be 9. I apologize, but you know what? Your Eagles, they're playing this week, and so that's good, right? That keeps you awake, keeps you going.
I guess.
Have you decided if you're going to be able to make it out to Philadelphia for any of these playoff games?
Well, I mean, not confirming, but I mean, if they do make the NFC Championship, maybe. We'll see.
All right. I'm very jealous in that regard. Would love to see the Chargers host an AFC Championship game at some point in my lifetime. That'd be really fun. Obviously, like I said, we're here to talk about the coaching decisions today. Before we get started, if you are listening or watching and you wouldn't mind taking the time to subscribe, like the video, leave us a rating or review on the audio platform of your choice, we would really appreciate that. So this is officially the time of the year where some people start to check out of the podcast land, and we would obviously appreciate you guys sticking around for the off-season content. Got a lot of fun stuff planned this time around for the draft, for free agency, all of that good stuff. We're gonna have you guys covered wire to wire this off-season, and hopefully you guys stick around. So that being said, let's dive in here. First and foremost, Chargers obviously deciding to retain Brandon Staley. That's where we are going to start today's conversation. Obviously, the 4 of us on Saturday night show, we're all pretty much in favor of moving on from Brandon Staley. So I want to discuss the ultimate decision to move on from, or to keep him around. Obviously, people are still talking about like, oh, they should still fire the head coach. It's not happening. That would have been the first move made if that were actually happening. So obviously, Brandon Staley is going to be the coach for 2023. I would like to frame this, since all 4 of us were pretty much against him returning. I would like to frame this conversation in the sense of how Brandon Staley regains our trust and our confidence, and be able to kind of talk about the things that Brandon Staley has to do from here on out in order to kind of regain his former reputation, if you will. So, Tyler, we'll start with you. First of all, your reaction to Brandon Staley, keeping his job again, and then secondly, What are you kind of expecting, or what are you hoping for over the next few months in order to have him regain your trust?
It wasn't a surprise. Seeing him stay on and Tom Telesco stay on was not a surprise. I believe if anyone had the the lowest chance of being fired, it was Brandon Staley. And then because you're not firing Staley, you're likely not firing Tom Telesco. So both of them sticking around, not a huge surprise. And listen, I wanted them to move on, but I understand and can even not get behind, but I understand like what they're doing by keeping him because like we talked about, even after they lost to the Jaguars, and even after we talked about them moving on from Staley, is that like I do see a world where the Chargers do get better, they do improve. You want a coach to develop and get better. So there's some hope there. But I was out on this regime like 2/3 of the way through the season this year because it just didn't feel like anything had particularly changed with this team up until that point. And frankly, I don't really buy that the games that they won and this winning streak that they keep talking about in their press conferences. I don't put a lot of stock in that, to be completely honest. And I didn't during the season, and I don't now. As far as winning back my trust, then it now just comes down to winning. Like I don't really care what it is at this point. If injuries hit you again, that stings at some. But like you feel bad, but if they don't make the playoffs because of all injuries again, and potentially because of the sports science team that you have and the training staff that you have, sorry, but you have to go, fair or not. The Chargers and Brandon Staley in particular need to win games and win games against good head coaches. And this, I mean, look at the schedule coming up. Now, apparently, we might get Shaw in Denver instead of someone like Sean Payton, but that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
But we could see Sean Payton in Denver. You've got Andy Reid twice a year. You've got Harbaugh. You've got McDermott. You've got Belichick. McCarthy. But hey, they won a playoff game and they're in the postseason. They just had a great game. So it's going to be tough for them next year. And if you just look at the Chargers this past year, and really the 2 years under Brandon Staley, there's only 3 wins in both seasons against teams with 10 or more wins. Like this team is just kind of, if they're underperforming, if their head coach is better across from them, they lose. That's pretty much how it goes with the Chargers under Brandon Staley. So they need to win. They need to win consistently, and they need to be good head coaches. If, the second half of next year, half the teams are out of the race and quarterbacks are hurt and guys are hurt and they win games, that doesn't really mean a lot to me. I want to see them beat these good head coaches, really starting with the Chiefs and Andy Reid. And then honestly, at the end of the day, I need to see this defense be good. Like the defense hasn't been good overall. Not really.
Good for more than 4 games.
Good for more than 4 games and good against good quarterbacks and good head coaches and good schemes. Like, congratulations. You beat up on Tua on a downswing. I mean, we've talked about this a billion times, but Nick Foles, Ryan Tannehill on 1 foot, Baker Mayfield, and then got boat raced by, Russell Wilson. And then the second half against the Jags, they did circles around you. So I don't know. I need to see winning, and I need to see at the very least for Brandon Staley to get my trust. I need to see him be good at his side of the ball. And I mean like good throughout the entire year. Like say what you want about Robert Saleh as a head coach. Maybe and I feel bad because he's Zach Wilson, but that unit was like a top 6 unit in EPA per play this year. Like
they were so good on defense.
Right. At the end of the day, Robert Saleh, a defensive minded head coach, their defense was good. And so you can see with that team, it's like, okay, if we just get a quarterback and fix our offense, we're good. With this team, you could get an offensive coordinator, and we'll talk about that, and they might be good, but like this defense also needs to be really good because right now the offensive coordinator is walking into a situation where they have to put up 27 points per game just to have a good winning record. I mean, because this defense is really not doing them any favors. So win games, be good on defense. I think they'll start to earn my trust. But for the Chargers overall, really after this season, after talking to so many fans, I think a lot of us feel this way. My love and excitement for this team naturally, inherently, is gone. I feel like it now has to be earned. And so they have to earn it. And I don't know when I'll start trusting this coach, but I do need to start seeing winning and good defense.
Do we want to start specifically with reaction to Staley being kept, or do we want to talk about the press conference yet, or just kind of mix it all?
We'll talk about the press conference after this.
Okay.
This part.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like Tyler said, it wasn't a surprise. I mean, I think the expectation going into Tuesday when they announced it was that Lombardi would be fired. They fire him and Shane Day, and retain Brandon Staley. Um, yeah, I mean, I felt when we came on here on Saturday night, we were all mad, rightfully so, about what happened. And, we all came on and we're kind of in agreement that Staley had to go. And I felt the same way when I woke up Monday morning. I wrote my piece for Volpe, which, I mean, I still kind of feel that way. And then Tuesday, of course, they announced their base. I mean, they didn't announce that they were retaining Brandon Staley, but they said that they were keeping him. In terms of what he can do going forward to earn trust, I think like Tyler said, it's kind of put up or shut up time in terms of wins and losses, but just more consistency in terms of the decision making as well, because I think that's been the most erratic thing with Staley, because wins and losses will come either way, and that will ultimately decide Staley's fate. Obviously, you have to get an offensive coordinator in here who's going to fix the offense, whether that's Frank Reich or somebody else. But I just think that was where Staley went kind of most awry this season, in a way that wasn't like in an X's and O's, defense or his offense and where they were ranked in the league. Was just, the fourth down stuff. He kind of explained it in his press conference today. We'll get to that in a little bit. That was just kind of inconsistent. And then the thing that hangs over the last 2 weeks of the season was particularly the decision with Mike Williams, right? You get to that, and this is a Staley who has talked about not playing anyone in the preseason. He's always acted on not playing anyone in the preseason. Then we get to week 18, and of course, what happened with Mike Williams happened. So you get to that stuff, the decision making, the adjustments, the regression that we've seen coming out of third quarter, coming out of halftime. So for me, I would just like to see, a more consistent Staley, and what we would see in, what we saw in 2021, right? Win or loss in 2021, I felt like Staley was pretty money, like when it came to press conferences and like just explaining his decisions in a way. The national media jumped on him in a big way when it came to fourth down, and obviously what happened in the Raiders game. But we were all pretty behind him at that point. It was like, yeah, look, the decision to go for, on fourth down from Euro 23, it didn't work, but we were all behind the thought process. And I felt like the reception that Staley got from the media then kind of altered his thought process in 2021 and made, or 2022, I should say, and made him a little bit of a less confident coach in terms of the decisions he was making. So I just like to see a more thorough, thought process where, it's kind of not inconsistent decision making. And then, like Tyler said, I mean, I think you obviously have to get wins. You probably need a playoff win next year. Obviously, a lot of things can happen in the season to the point where, we can say whether Staley would be on the hot seat or not based on his result. But, obviously the Chargers didn't really feel like they went far enough this year, or, otherwise changes wouldn't have been being made. So obviously they need a playoff win next year. They need success, and they need their offense and defense to both be better. But just as a whole, I'd like to see Staley be philosophically more similar and in tune to what he was as a coach in 2021 as opposed to 2022.
Yeah, Alex, I think that's a really good point, and not just like his actions, right? Because his actions took a big step back in that regard. And in 2021, it was like, oh, we have Justin Herbert, like we're gonna trust the offense, like I have full confidence in them. We're going to take advantage of every single possession, and you can't score field goals, and you can't punt the ball against the Chiefs. Like you have to go and score touchdowns. So we're going to do everything possible to do that. And then this year it's like, well, our defense is better. We trust them more. Our special teams is better. We trust them more. And so I do think the messaging of the way that he goes about coaching the offense in particular, I think is something that needs to change. And I'm curious overall if he does take on a larger role with this new regime on offense, if you will. I think that is kind of the next step for him is becoming more of a CEO coach as opposed to just, kind of a defensive coordinator who handles the situations, if you want to put it that way. So I think this is going to be a necessary step, obviously, for Brandon Staley. And, I'm certainly by no means surprised that they retained his position. The Chargers front office believes in Brandon Staley, and several national reporters reported before the game on Saturday night that he was not in danger, and he kind of echoed that sentiment today. I thought the the way that particular exchange was tweeted out was a little unfair to Brandon Staley, to be completely honest. And he has full confidence in what he's been able to establish with the Chargers and the steps that they've been able to take. And I think the front office, the organization, is behind him, and they want to trust his vision and see it through. Obviously, they've been patient in the past, and there was no reason to believe that they were not going to be patient this time around. So obviously now we know he's the head coach, and I think you guys are doing a great job of highlighting the things that we need to see from him. And for me, I don't necessarily need him to give up play calling on defense, but I do think we need to see him have that larger role on offense. And I'm hopeful that it happens. He talked a lot today about his vision for the offense, and like everything he was describing was not in line with the way that Joe Lombardi coached football games. Like it felt like, listening to him describe that, and obviously reading Daniel Popper's article this past week from all of the people that Brandon Staley tried to hire. And it's like, well, he didn't really feel like he had a backup plan. So he just essentially hired the guy that he knew and trusted. And that's just obviously not, I don't think that's the way that you coach football in 2023.
Mhm.
Like, I do think you need that proper alignment between you and your coordinators. I just don't know how much that's going to change going forward. So, for Brandon Staley, obviously I'm hopeful, but like Tyler was saying, I do think that he's going to have to earn this trust back.
Regarding the role on offense, I'm so curious, and we'll never really know, but I'm curious how much say Lombardi, let's say, had or Brandon Staley had in who, or at least how they did personnel with the offense. Because in the draft, right, or even in free agency, with the players they acquire, Corey Linsley, Zion Johnson, Rashawn Slater, they drafted Josh Palmer, Trey McKitty. Like, it's not like they're not investing in the offense. But when it comes time, for the season, and I mean, Joe Lombardi, to his credit, for the most part, always went up and said, "My fault, my bad, I suck, I need to do better." But when he's up there and he says, "Hey, I don't have speed. Like, yeah, I can scheme things open. I don't have any speed." When stuff like that happens, you wonder, how much control does he have? How much control would this next offense coordinator have? If Brandon Staley needs someone, they'll go get someone, and they'll be on the roster.
Mhm.
If Ryan Ficken wants something on special teams, hey, Raheem Lane over JT Woods. We're getting, Larry Roundtree over Isaiah Spiller. I don't know if Joe Lombardi has any control with that, that spot, and I guess it doesn't matter now. But I'd like Brandon Staley to help out his coordinators a bit more. If whoever this offensive coordinator more, whoever this is, if they go out and they have no speed threat that's legitimately rosterable, or they have Foster Sarah out there at right tackle and a quarterback with busted ribs, I'd like Brandon Staley to go, okay, this isn't working clearly, and we need to do a little bit more here. It doesn't have to be a lot, but there just needs to be something. So I'd love to see him get involved with the philosophy, of course, if that's what he wants. And we'll find out what his philosophy is, because if they do the same things on offense, guess what? It might have been a Brandon Staley problem this whole time. So I want to see him involved in the philosophy, a change, hopefully, and then just help this offense out if there's personnel issues, which, he's 50-50 on those before, but get your guys some help. If your offensive coordinator goes, "Hey, I don't have a speed threat," and you just go, "Okay, good luck." That's not going to work. Figure it out with Foster Sarah against Nick Bosa. You can't do that. I understand you want to believe in some of your guys, but it's the NFL and you're not dumb. Help these guys out. So hopefully in the future they do.
Yeah, I think what Tyler said there is on point, and also just kind of going into the Chargers had so much next man up mentality this year, right? And obviously with the amount of injuries they sustained, it wasn't feasible to just trade for a guy every week, right? Otherwise, they
Right.
would. But they also could have been more aggressive at the trade deadline, right? And Staley obviously traded for Khalil Mack in the offseason and made the big money move and signing JC Jackson and doing all these things in the offseason. So if he had really wanted a guy at the trade deadline, I imagine Telesco would have kind of gotten him for him, right? So it's that's kind of the thing too. Definitely personnel, I think, just being a little bit more aggressive than reactive to whatever's happening on the roster is a big deal. And then, like Tyler said, get your offensive coordinator, whoever that is going forward, some help, right? If that's even as something simple as a backup quarterback they want, if that's a choice for a wide receiver, whatever it might be, Whatever offensive coordinator who's going to come in here is probably going to want some say in personnel, whether it's as someone as experienced as Frank Reich or someone who's even more inexperienced, right? They just want the best tools out there on the field, so they can bring this offense with Justin Herbert, forward. So definitely get some more speed in the offense. And, obviously, we'll talk about Staley's, speed comments today, but overall, yeah, just would need to see a little bit more work towards the offense. And then, defensive play calling will be interesting because this is kind of like Staley's last chance, right? Like as a defensive coordinator, right? Like in terms of what happens this season. So, I know the defense got better towards the end of the season, but at the end of the year, you were still ranked 20th, right? In defense, and he kind of explained that today in a way. But, you just need to be better than that going forward, especially if you were hired to be a defensive coordinator.
Yeah, I like how he was saying that they were like a top 10 defense over the last 2 months of the season. It's like, great.
Top 6 defense.
Where's that in the first 2 months of the season?
Also, the first half does matter.
Yeah. I think that quote was a little overblown as well, but
it was.
So obviously we're highlighting a bunch of different things. I'm curious, obviously, what people have in the chat tonight. So let us know what you guys think Brandon Staley has to do to regain your trust if he has lost it. So obviously we've kind of highlighted a few different things here in terms of the fourth down mentality, in terms of consistency, in terms of obviously improving the defense, consistency of messaging and philosophy. I think those are all really good things. So all right, let's get to some of the takeaways from the press conference today. Again, I didn't have a ton of takeaways in terms of like I don't necessarily want to rehash like his decision from week 18. I was mostly focusing in on the offensive coordinator mentality. And we'll get to, again, some of our criteria, some of the things we're looking for, and then obviously our candidates here in a second. But it does sound like Brandon Staley is kind of leaning towards that McVay, like LaFleur, Shanahan system. Man, I should have worn my run the damn ball hat today. What a missed opportunity by me. But I think the way that Brandon Staley was kind of describing it, obviously it does sound like they're going to overhaul the run game. And I don't think that means he's going to draft Bijan Robinson in the first round, like going to get that out of the way now. This team has way too many other needs to take a running back in the first round, respectfully. But I do think that, they're going to bring in a lot of people or a lot of coaches who kind of have that background in successful run games. And I think rightfully so. So that was really my biggest takeaway is the kind of system, kind of philosophy, mentality that Brandon Staley is looking for on offense, and particularly, like he mentioned several times, marrying the run game and the pass game as opposed to have it being kind of two separate units. Because to me, I look at the decision to fire Joe Lombardi and Shane Day as kind of an indictment on that particular process, because Joe Lombardi comes from the Saints offense, Shane Day comes from the Shanahan offense, and it just never really felt like the two meshed together at the level that the Chargers were kind of hoping it to be. So that is something that I think is the right decision to say, hey, like, insert coach here, Frank Reich, Joe Brady, whoever your offensive coordinator is. We also have a quarterbacks coach opening for you to decide to come in and pick your guy. So I do think that this decision to fire both of them at the same time will help them and help Brandon Staley kind of marry the two together.
I really think that having a quarterbacks coach opening is pretty big for this team, because whoever they bring in, if successful, let's say it's Frank Reich, Joe Brady, whoever, if they're successful as an offensive coordinator in this first year, which they probably will be. I mean, listen, this season sucked for the Chargers overall. Guys were hurt. Herbert had busted ribs. He still got 4,700 yards out of it. So, as long as you have a half decent season, this guy's probably getting hired next year. So having that quarterbacks coach that this guy can bring in to groom, I think more than someone like a Shane Day, and really prepare for, the offensive coordinator's departure so the quarterbacks coach can step up. I think that's huge. His words and how he described what he was looking for in an offensive coordinator today really changed my list a little bit in terms of the candidate that we're going to talk about, because it's like, oh, Steven and I messaged on the side too. It's like, it really does sound like a particular candidate. It's probably not going to be him for certain reasons, but it really does seem like they want a specific guy. So that was really my only takeaway, and Steven already talked about it. So with that said, I know I'm not I don't have as many takeaways as the next person. So Alex, have at it.
All right. Well, first talking about the coordinator thing. I mean, I didn't have a lot of takeaways from a coordinator standpoint, just because I felt like Popper kind of like asked the question, right? He obviously asked like, "Hey, are you looking for guys from like the Shanahan, like McVay kind of thing?" And then Staley was sort of like, "Well, you can look at my background and like see the guys that I would be interested in, right? Like in terms of what his background's been in the league." And then but then someone asked, I don't remember if it was Reedy, but he asked his experience, like how much experience does this person who's going to be coordinator need to have? And Staley was kind of like, it would help if they had experience, but also like it doesn't matter. Like we're going to hire the best possible guy. I came from D3. Look at my story, right? So like it doesn't really matter how much experience the guy has, whether it's just a matter if they're the best fit for the job. So in terms of the offensive coordinator stuff, I didn't really feel like Staley said anything like declarative today in terms of eliminating people. I want to preface what I'm about to say first with the disclaimer that what Staley did was very hard today, right? Like Bill Plaschke's there, all these national reporters who don't cover the Chargers all come into that room and,
wanted to eat him alive. Yeah.
Right. To eat him alive, right? It is sharks in the water. And so that, I don't envy that position. I think it's really difficult. And also there was no way for Staley to win today, right? There's no way he comes out of that press conference and people are like, "Oh man, you did a really great job, and I have faith in him going forward."
Yeah, if you were anti-Staley today, before today, you were probably still anti-Staley.
Yeah, I think if you think Brandon Staley should have been fired Saturday, then you think he should be fired today. If you think he should be kept Saturday, then you think he should be kept today, regardless of his press conference. That's a disclaimer. That being said, I don't know, man. Like this press conference kind of stunk. Like it wasn't very good. I mean, he kind of got indignant with the Mike Williams stuff in response to the Week 18 thing. And then like Daniel Popper followed up with him a couple times and like tried to get an answer. And then you just sort of got these platitudes like, "Well, we didn't know the answer to the Cincinnati-Baltimore game." You did, right? Like, and then he brings up Tom Brady, never missing a game. He always plays Week 18. Okay, but the Buccaneers played Tom Brady in the first quarter, and then you played Herbert 3 quarters, right? So, in terms of your philosophy on players, like the Mike Williams stuff is a total non-starter for me. But past that, I just felt like there was a lot of, I take full responsibility. I take full accountability. We need to be better in all 3 phases of the game. However, look at the first half. Like there was a lot of that in this press conference. And he brought it up like 4 or 5 times. Like the first half is what this team could be going forward. And I really think that Brandon Staley was just trying to approach that as far as being like a glass half full guy. That being said, no one wants to hear about the first half when you lose 27-0 lead. Yeah. Like no one wants to hear about it, man. And so from that standpoint, I just think that was like a tough background to his press conference today. The Mike Williams thing, like I said, for me is a non-starter. I know, the opinions on that will diverge depending on, what you believe. But I know we kind of universally as a podcast, we're kind of like, what the hell is he doing in Week 18? So I don't know. Again, Steven and Tyler, you already said you were anti-Staley before this press conference. You were still anti-Staley. If you were pro-Staley, you're probably still pro-Staley. But it felt like he was saying the right things in terms of getting it to buy in, but he also wasn't reading the room, right? And that was sort of my big takeaway from this press conference. That doesn't mean you have to be like a crying baby at the podium and just be like, "I'm sorry, guys," like the whole time and crouch in the fetal position. But, I also just don't think that some of Staley's indignance towards questions today was completely earned, particularly because of the blown lead and because of a lot of the questionable decisions that we saw over the course of the season with roster construction, as well as the injury stuff. So for me, I just didn't buy this press conference today. I know, it's a controversial take on Twitter. I don't care, but I just thought it could have been better. And honestly, in the long term, this doesn't matter because the next podcast, we're just going to talk about hey, who's the best offensive coordinator we can put around? And we're going to flip the page and be like, who's, what do we do about this team going forward? And what's the best resources we can put around Staley? But yeah, I mean, I wasn't particularly impressed with that press conference today. And in terms of inspiring confidence, I don't think Staley really did it going forward.
Yeah, I will say, he could have come out and said the greatest things of all time. It could have been like his first press conference where everything was like, man, he's saying all the right things. We love this guy. Amazing. I mean, it doesn't really matter for anyone who was out. I mean, they're out and we're happy to jump back in at some point, but you got to earn it. The press conference, there's a couple of things I could definitely nitpick with how he responded. It's kind of just been like a month or so of responses, really, after that week 18 game. It's like, I understand why you said some of the things you've said, but maybe you just shouldn't have said those things. And it's kind of been like the last month or so of that. So him saying some stuff today is just like, okay. I did think the one comment about him being like, hey, sometimes you can find like that hidden guy. 3 years ago, there was this outside linebackers coach who became a defensive coordinator. That was me. And I'm like, dude, like that's great. You're awesome.
Let's go to Mercyhurst for the offensive coordinator.
Brandon, that doesn't have to be the goal, man. You don't have to find like the next hidden gem here. You can pick from the top shelf and get the high quality old stuff.
Oh boy, the high quality old stuff. It was fine press conference. I wasn't really moved either way.
Yeah, I think Alex's point is a fair point. I think it goes back to the consistency of messaging. Like I don't think anybody would have had a problem if he said, this is what our process was, this is what we believed, this is why we did it, and just left it at that. Once you start getting to the point where you're talking about like, well, we didn't know if the Ravens were going to be able to win or not. It's like they were starting Anthony Brown. They were starting a third string quarterback and were like 14-point underdogs.
Yeah.
Like you knew, like, come on, like you knew. So it just is like the way that I think he handles it. And, hopefully he's able to learn from, this kind of media presence. And, maybe that is something to buy into now that the Chargers obviously kind of have more national attention. He's going to have to start dealing with this at a higher level. So, this is going to be a process for him. He's going to be entering next season on the national hot seat, and he's going to have to figure out how to handle all of these media members like Bill Plaschke, who only shows up to Chargers media stuff whenever he wants to talk shit on Brandon Staley and the Chargers. For the record, I love the way that Brandon Staley handled that last question when Bill Plaschke wanted to butt in right before the press conference was ending. So, this is going to be something that he has to do, just like he's going to have to win over a lot of Chargers fans. He's going to have to win over a lot of media members back. And I think it has to go beyond, his ability as a game planner on defense, because we have seen flashes of that, right? Like the Miami game and all of these things. And, obviously the first half against the Jaguars, right? He's going to have to do more than just be a smart game planner. And a lot of that is dealing with the media too. Okay, holy cow, this super chat.
It's in pesos.
Oh, okay.
I saw it too. I'm like $125.
Wait, how much?
But hey, man, appreciate that. Pedro Ramirez, greatly appreciate that. We've had some other super chats in here as well. We'll start with Pedro's, I guess. If the Chargers hired an OC from the Shanahan tree, do you think that Michael Mayer is the pick in round 1 if available? I don't know enough about Michael Mayer at this point to say.
Yeah.
I think if you are hiring somebody from the Shanahan tree, I don't think a tight end like Michael Mayer necessarily is off the board, but I don't think he would be like absolutely the pick if he's available.
Right. No correlation. And if you kind of hire an offensive coordinator from the Shanahan tree, who's to say they don't want like a fast wide receiver weapon, right? So like, I don't think that necessarily means tight end.
I like Michael Mayer. Okay, here's the problem with tight ends. I started with Mayer. I've literally watched one prospect, so he's number 1 on my board. He's doing great, or last, depending on how you look at it. The problem with Michael Mayer, I'm watching these tight ends, is the first time I started watching tight ends was the same year that Kyle Pitts was in the draft pool.
So everybody's compared to the unicorn.
Right. It's literally like that's a generational talent. When you offensive tackles, I watch Penei Sewell. I watch Jamar Chase. Like, it's so hard to evaluate some guys. So honestly, Michael Mayer probably gets like a second round grade for me at the end of the day. I'll see what the other guys are like. I have no idea, but I'm not opposed. Like you're picking 21 or 20. Is it 21 officially? Yeah.
21 officially. Yep.
So, I'm not opposed because you're not really getting first round guys at that point, but we'll see.
Yeah, there were a lot of takeaways regarding Brandon Staley's comment about speed, and I think he's right. Like I think he just didn't expressly say like we need more speed, and people kind of took an issue with it.
Right.
They don't need more Jalen Guytons. Like I think they do, but you're not going to go out there and spend primary resources on somebody like Jalen Guyton. So what he's saying is that they need to be more explosive on offense in every way, not just having speed. And I think that is the right process to have. Like, they were, I think, officially like third to last in explosive runs this year. And, they don't really have a ton of guys who, break a lot of tackles in space. That's another problem that they don't really have. So I think Brandon Staley is right. I think people just kind of overreacted about that particular clip.
Yeah, I think he's right that, obviously he talked about marrying the run game and the pass game, and like that will create more explosive plays, more mismatches. But also this is kind of a reading the room thing for me, because it's like the noticeable thing on this team is they don't have speed right now, right? Like that is the very noticeable thing when you watch them. And we know Telesco's quirks with drafting, right? In terms of the right height and the right speed for receivers. But, so I think when people are like, oh, well, you should get speed and that would help, to be like, well, we need everything. It's like, yeah, but you all, more specifically to your problem, you do need speed. And so,
Sure.
I mean, I just think that was kind of what the question was trying to get at.
Sure. All right. Another super chat from Austin Levitt. Appreciate it. He wants to know, is there any way to keep both Pipkins and Fox?
Yeah.
Sure. Like depends how aggressive they're willing to be in terms of like restructuring and things like that. With the current existing number of cap space that they have right now, no, they would be able to keep like one key free agent. So, the Chargers are going to have to be very creative this year in freeing up cap space.
Yeah. We don't have time today to get into free agency news, but we definitely have a lot to talk about coming up with that, with both what we do know already and what we're kind of projecting. But I do think Fox is the least likely of the two, although Fox is obviously a Staley guy.
All right, trying to find the other one.
If you can't find it, we do have a new one at the bottom.
Okay, you can put that one up there. I'm going to keep scrolling.
Okay. From Romy, a little off topic, but Popper said the team was trying to trade Keenan last offseason. Do you think they'll revisit that this offseason? So I don't really buy that they tried to trade him last offseason. I don't know what
they could have like made a call. I don't think that's like them, expressly going out and saying, hey, we're going to try and trade Keenan Allen.
Yeah. I mean, someone might have called them, but I don't really buy that this offseason, though. Yes, I do think that's possible. Although I don't know how trading works in terms of the cap hit. Like they would have to take on that contract. Otherwise, it's more cost effective for them to just cut him. No.
For Keenan, it's about the same.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I believe that another team may have investigated last year whether trading for Keenan was okay. Don't think the Chargers ever seriously engaged in it, but Keenan's contract is kind of a tradable asset right now, right? Because it's effectively an expiring deal with the out in 2024. So, whatever team is trading for him is getting 1 year of Keenan Allen, right? And you don't have this big contract that's like going forward in the books. He is a little bit older, obviously, coming off of the injuries and stuff this year. I don't think it's a crazy discussion to trade him. Obviously Keenan's been here for a decade, right? So I mean that plays into it in terms of like being a fan favorite and stuff, and obviously he's well respected in the locker room. But Tom Telesco kind of has very, it's apparent that he set up Keenan Allen and Mike Williams contracts in a way where he can get out of both of them in 2024, right? And he can get out by trading most likely Keenan Allen this year, right? So the odds are for your, opening day 2024, which you're still very far away from, one of them's probably not going to be on the roster. And if you had to bet right now, the most likely option of those two is Keenan obviously not being here.
Yeah, we'll have a lot of time to dive into all of that offseason stuff. I will say the team is going to look very, very different once Justin Herbert's extension hits, and that's
Right.
the way that the Chargers plan for this roster
Yep.
around him. So
Mhm.
a lot of these core guys are not going to be here once Justin Herbert gets paid. All right, the other one that I was trying to get to, Richard Mazara, he wanted to ask about our reactions, wanted to jump off the building. I think we obviously kind of answered that. I will say, I don't know if Richard is still in the chat, but I did not see your sign at the game. I didn't.
That's
I don't know if
right.
I don't know if anybody else caught the Sean Payton, Mike Williams sign that Richard had at the game, and I hope that game was less painful being there in person than it was watching it on TV.
Yeah,
which is probably not true. Having just been at a very painful game in person at the Rose Bowl, so I think that was there another super chat before that one? I don't think so.
No, there's this one here and then one after.
Okay. Shout out to Isaac McGray. I actually met him at the Super Bowl, or not the Super Bowl, excuse me, the Rose Bowl.
Yeah, we don't go to those.
So
that's Steven's Super Bowl.
Pretty much, man.
Yeah.
He wants to know thoughts on why the linebacker coach was fired. Easy to put to blame. So Tyler, you actually reached out about this. What do you have to say about this?
Well, let me see. Oh, my name's not up. My user tag name, whatever, for this stream, I changed it to definitely not about Kenneth Murray. I can definitely confirm that there's a strong opinion out there that this firing was not about Kenneth Murray, whether you believe that or not. But I certainly got an interesting message the other day. Whatever. It's a scapegoat firing. It's the lowest guy on the totem pole. There's no reason to fire Michael Wilhoit. I don't see, after Kaiser White's good year, Drew Tranquil's good year, it's not Michael Wilhoit that went out last year and said, let's try Kenneth Murray at edge. I highly doubt that was his decision. So it's a scapegoat fire. And I think, and can I really say this is, added to it or not? I don't know. But Alohi Gilman coming out and saying some very positive things about him, one of the best coaches he's been around. I guess I don't know what else he's supposed to say, but I think him saying that and the random message that I got and what I was told from someone who, we talked to is it's a scapegoat fire, unfortunately. So it seems like he was good for the team and they had to fire somebody and he was the lowest guy on the totem pole.
Yeah. Staley didn't say anything about Wilhoit today. Granted, no one really asked him about Wilhoit specifically.
I was surprised about that.
Yeah, no one really asked him about it specifically, but he also didn't mention it. He just kind of talked about it in the general term of coaching firings. He's also, that was one of his quotes today. He also said the situation's fluid, right? So there could be more coaching changes to come on the staff, whether that's in the form of firings or people leaving for other jobs. So, I guess watch that going forward. But yeah, we don't have a whole lot of information on Wilhoit, although, it doesn't feel like there's one thing you can point to and was like, oh, that guy was bad, because if you're talking about the disorganization at the second and third levels of the defense and lack of developing players, I should say, you could talk about a lot of, positions on this roster where that's the case, not just the linebackers guy. So yeah, not a specific reason that's outright for right now.
Yeah, I mean, it did feel like a scapegoat firing. I don't think that linebacker was a strength of the team, although I feel like it was the depth of that unit is probably one of the deeper units on the team so far. There were some technical things. I thought that the way that the linebackers played all season was a bit of an issue. How much that was his coaching, I don't know. It's really hard to kind of sift through okay, Kaiser White had a career season, Drew Tranquil had a career season playing under him, but Kenneth Murray didn't necessarily take a ton of steps, and there were still kind of some issues there. So it is a little difficult to siphon through. He's one of the coaches that I don't think is essential to the way that they coach defense. I think Jay Rogers and Derek Ansley and Ronaldo Hill are essential to the way that Brandon Staley wants to coach defense. And it just kind of felt like Michael Wilhoit was kind of around. So that's essentially why he got fired.
And I should have had this in front of me. What's the name of the DB coach they're hiring or interviewing?
I almost said Ron Howard. Yeah, I almost said
that's
Ron
what
Howard.
I said too. That was the first thing I thought of. It's not.
But from Cleveland, right? I forget his Ryan Howard.
Yes. Sure.
Ryan Howard.
Yeah, they're hiring Ron Howard. Jeff Howard. White
Jeff
dude named Howard. Okay.
Okay.
They're hiring, or they're not hiring, but they're interviewing Jeff Howard. I think, honestly, that is the guy they're going to hire. I think that's who Brandon Staley called when he asked about Ficken. Ficken already has a relationship with this guy. And I think that's the hire. I think that's going to be the linebackers coach. So Jeff Howard.
Jeff Howard. I will say the thing that's at least maybe slightly concerning about this decision is that it means that there's like 2 former NFL players on the staff, and that's not the end all be all in terms of like, you know, putting together a coaching staff in the NFL. But I think you lose a little bit of credibility when you don't have that many former NFL players on staff anymore. So I don't know if that's going to be possible with the coaching moves that are coming, but you know, I do hope that they're able to kind of replace him in that regard. Again, we have some other things to get to, so we'll roll through these other super chats. Don Cheeto wants to know our thoughts about DeAndre Hopkins saying LA is one of his destinations. I assume he's talking about the Rams because it's not happening with the Chargers.
Yeah, Pantages Theater is great. You know, they have Hamilton sometimes. Enjoy.
Yeah, have Mike Williams, not happening.
Yeah, they don't. The Chargers have like they barely have enough money to sign like Cal Van Noy back. Like, come on. Alan Silva, the other super chat here, he says, thank you guys for all your dedication. I enjoyed your podcasts and YouTube videos throughout this season. Thank you very much. And then he says, indeed, Staley messed the season up as well as Telesco and Dean Spanos. I think everybody
Stanley fucked it all up. It was all Stanley.
Yeah. I think everybody is at fault. I don't think you can really pinpoint this on one person. Yeah. So yes, the answer is yes. All 3 of those people are at fault.
100%. And thank you, Alan. It's very kind of you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I appreciate that. All right. We're going to pivot here and talk about the offensive coordinator. Again, Staley today kind of outlined some things that he's looking for the offensive coordinator position. So you can put the sheet up if you want, Tyler. We can have that going. So we're each going to have our top 5 candidates, and then we're also going to have an honorable mention candidate. Before we get to that point, we've all kind of hinted at it on Twitter, the things we're looking for this position. Alex, we'll start with you. What are a couple of things that you are looking for in order in an offensive coordinator candidate to obviously come over and coach the Chargers?
Yeah, I think Staley's pointed to sort of like a diverse background, like being able to do a lot of things for one, right? And obviously coming from an offensive scheme that is a little bit more diverse, that kind of does mean like Shanahan, right, system offense. We're looking for like a West Coast guy. But obviously, you know, there's not a whole lot of like experienced offensive coordinators who are going to be in this hunt. It's going to be a lot of guys who are QB coaches. It's going to be a lot of guys who, you know, come from different backgrounds or offensive assistants who are looking to become first-time offensive coordinators. Obviously, it's not the case with all of the candidates, but it's the case with, you know, a good number of them, right? So, you know, I don't know if there's like a set criteria, but if you're looking sort of for like my personal opinion, I think that you want a guy who is a little bit more experienced, has been in the league for longer. For Staley, who is kind of a younger coach and, you know, has had some of these problems with some like game management type stuff, you know, I don't think it would be bad to have like an older coach that's sort of like in his ear, been around, done that. But that doesn't necessarily mean they would have to have been like a coordinator per se. Yeah. And then for me, just someone who is able to kind of take their quarterback to the next level. And we're going to talk about guys that are on our list who have maximized quarterbacks they've been with. I'm sure Steven has one particular guy on his list too, that is, you know, very familiar with that. But it is obviously, and Brandon Staley talked about this in his press conference today, maximizing what you can get out of Justin Herbert. And so, you know, we're going to talk about offensive schemes as well as, you know, particular coaches who have been able to do that with quarterbacks.
Yeah. Go ahead, Tyler. Sorry.
Oh, okay. All fantastic points. I'm just looking for someone who, it's tough because if I list all my criteria, there's no one that really fits that completely. But I'd prefer at this point someone with a bit of experience with, you know, some kind of unique scheme to them, something that deviates away. Not necessarily like they are unique and that they're the only team that does this, but something that's not, you know, the Chargers, who were basically the least unique scheme in the NFL the last year and really close to someone like the New Orleans Saints with Andy Dalton. You expect a bit more than that. But more than anything, if possible, I'd like to find a coordinator who has shown that they can do more with less. That's not always possible. Some guys on the list, they've never called plays before at this level. You can't always find a coordinator who's called plays, but you want to find someone, when Joe Lombardi, when he had everybody, the offense was better. Last year, it was even great at times, but you lose one player, you lose two players. I mean, you lose Jamari Sawyer, at one point against the Jaguars, and suddenly, we can't protect, we can't run. You lose Keenan Allen at one point in the game, or Mike Williams during the game. Oh, shoot, don't know what to do. Let's retreat. I'd like to find someone who is a good stabilizing force and can do more with less.
Yeah, I think that's a great point as well. I think for me, experienced play calling at least in the NFL is not necessarily a prerequisite in my opinion. I think for me, one of the things that ultimately led to Joe Lombardi getting fired is just his ability to not be adaptable to the circumstances around him, and in each specific game as well. So, I mean, we always saw, obviously, whenever things got tight, whenever they needed to have an extended drive, it was always the concepts that he knew, that he was familiar with, the concepts that are a part of his DNA as a coach. And I think the more experiences, not necessarily play calling, but the more diverse background you have, the more things you're able to pull on throughout the season and throughout each individual game. So for me, it's adaptability above all else. I think just because you're going to have to go through a lot of different things. Keenan Allen, Mike Williams might get injured, Rashawn Slater might get injured. Like, what kind of different buttons can you push in order to get this offense off the ground, as opposed to just doing what and what you are comfortable with. And I think, like Alex is saying, I think for me, like we've learned so much about like the easy buttons that coordinators can push to get the quarterback going. Like, you have to have that ability to be able to get your quarterback going if he does hit a slump, or get your run game going if they are in a slump and things like that. And to an extension, again, I'm never going to ask for Justin Herbert to be Josh Allen. That is just, I don't think that's a sustainable way to use your quarterback in the run game. But I do want somebody who has experience working with mobile quarterbacks, who can allow Justin to have that confidence that we saw from him at stretches through last season, at stretches when he was a rookie, and take advantage of his ability to run and make plays. Because we've seen all throughout the league the advantages that having a mobile quarterback can give you, and so that's lower on the list than just like solving problems and things like that. But I do want somebody who has that experience of using the quarterback run game, using the RPO game, using rollouts, getting Justin Herbert more on the move. I think is also a way to get him going and give him some easy buttons.
Yeah, I would agree, and doing consistently.
Yeah. Excuse me. All right. So I know who my top candidate is. I know who Alex's top candidate is as well. But I'm curious, Tyler, here. How do you feel about one Mr. Frank Reich?
That's my number one. It's part of what I talked about you want guys who are, I would prefer someone who's called plays at this point for this particular team. Yes, Frank Reich, it could be gone the year after that. But as we talked about earlier, as I mentioned earlier, it's also about the quarterback's coach you bring in. And I don't know who that would be for Frank Reich, but I would imagine he could pull a very solid quarterback's coach to come in to even just be with Frank Reich for 1 year. And that is your offensive coordinator the following year if Frank Reich gets a head coaching job. Now, do I believe that Frank Reich is going to be an offensive coordinator this year? I'm 50-50. He could be a head coach. But right now, he's my number one. And I think just the experience, the potential staff that he could bring in, and things that he could rework, and really his work with less. I mean, they really haven't had a whole lot to work with. I mean, the poor guy gets there with one plan in mind, and suddenly that becomes, I mean, the Chargers made fun of the Colts for this, a quarterback carousel. And they really just did not have much to work with. But you at least see some good things with that offense, the way that guys have developed, the way the run game got going, the way some receivers have developed. Seems like a really, really solid system in place. And right now, Justin Herbert in a basic system can be good. I just want stability around him. I want consistency. I want the smart calls, the right decisions. And I think Frank Reich brings that to you. Is he the next up and coming, hot candidate? Not really. But Justin Herbert at this point, and really the Chargers just need a smart, solid, sound coordinator. And I think that can't be Frank Reich.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll see what kind of quarterbacks coach somebody like Frank Reich would bring. I'm sure he already has Nick Foles packed in his suitcase wherever he's going to go, and he'll be, new Chase Daniel. But aside from that, I think that Frank Reich, it makes too much sense for Frank Reich, and it makes too much sense for the Chargers, right? That's sort of the dynamic here. I don't know if Frank Reich is going to get a job in Carolina or Arizona, and then if that happens, then the Heat obviously is completely off the board. But he takes 1 year with Justin Herbert in that system. He's going to be probably the number one coaching candidate next year, right? In terms of sort of rebuilding his image. Benjamin Albright has sort of indicated that people view him more as an OC right now. You spend 1 year with Justin Herbert, and suddenly your perception is boosted nationally. But for the Chargers, it makes too much sense too, right? So I think that from their standpoint, it's like, okay, we're going to pair this guy with Herbert. This is also our last chance to hire an offensive coordinator. We are going for the most sure thing on the board. And so that is kind of why Frank Reich is number one compared to everyone else on my list personally. And why he is just such a high advantage there. There's a built-in relationship with Tom Telesco. Yes, Tom Telesco fired him, but he also has his number still, so he can bring him back. But just overall, I think Frank Reich makes a lot of sense for the Chargers in terms of being experienced, being that guy that can be in Staley's ear. And, kind of like Matt Castle said in that 33rd team clip, Frank Reich doesn't do, he does a lot different from Joe Lombardi, let's be clear. But in terms of, the RPOs and the stuff he does, but it's a lot of the same type formations and, kind of using the middle of the field, using mesh. There is some stick involved, not as much as Joe Lombardi would call it, but still some intermediate range stuff to the point where it's not a completely new offense for Justin Herbert to learn, while also taking advantage of triangle reads and RPOs and actively seeking out mismatches. So I think that's why Frank Reich is top dog for me.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about adaptability and problem solving and having diverse background. I mean, Frank Reich, people only remember right now him getting fired, but I mean, he coordinated and called plays for top 10 offenses featuring three completely different quarterbacks with Phillip Rivers and Andrew Luck and Carson Wentz. You want to talk about getting more from less, man? He got a top 10 offense out of Carson Wentz at quarterback.
Talk about more from less. I mean, those are the three that everybody keeps bringing up. But I mean, Andrew Luck retired a month before the season, and he played Jacoby Brissett, and the Colts, were projected to be, a 1-15, 2-14 type disaster. They end up finishing 7-9, I believe, with Jacoby Brissett, barely kind of missing the playoffs that year, if I'm correct. And Jacoby Brissett, had a season that was, pretty good, as a starter relative to what the expectations were.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Frank Reich, obviously kind of maximizing your quarterback there. That was not a year where Jacoby Brissett could have possibly been maximized and still got that Colts team to, basically relevance and some form of playoff contention towards the end.
Yeah, I think he brings so much to the table in terms of his experience, and that's something that Brandon Staley has never had on his coaching staff. He's never had a former head coach, and being able to rely upon Frank Reich to push all these different kind of buttons because he's been there and he's done that and he's seen everything you can see from a head coaching perspective. I mean, he started 5 straight seasons with 5 different quarterbacks, and every offense was competent, right? And he built a top offense out of a run heavy approach. He built a top 10 offense out of a deep play action passing game with Andrew Luck and a quick passing game with Phillip Rivers. And I mean, we all remember what 2019 Phillip Rivers was like on this show,
right?
And hopefully in this chat. And Frank Reich brought the best back out of Phillip Rivers. And, they had the Buffalo Bills on the ropes in 2020 in a playoff game. I think the way that he coaches quarterbacks is just at such a high level that the work he would be able to do with Justin Herbert would be, I would love to see this pairing. And I know that there are certain people who will point back to his days with the San Diego Chargers, obviously, and what he did with Mike McCoy. But I mean, he's grown so much since then, and he's been able to draw on so many different experiences. I mean, he won a Super Bowl in Philadelphia with Doug Peterson. he was a constant playoff threat in Indianapolis with all these different quarterbacks. So
Yeah.
I understand, like, you might have certain memories of of the halfback draws and things like that from the McCoy offense, but I think Frank Reich is a completely different coach than who he was the first time around in San Diego.
Right. And Mike McCoy was also hired as an offensive mind, right? It was Frank Reich calling plays for McCoy's offense, right?
Yeah.
Like that is the clear distinction as opposed to what this would be 7 years later after Frank Reich's gained all this experience, was just Frank Reich calling plays for Frank Reich's offense, right? Like that, I think, is the bigger distinction here. I think you guys have talked about maximizing quarterback play, and obviously that's a lot. But I think also we just mentioned adaptability, and what he sort of did with Phillip Rivers is very different a little bit than what he did with Carson Wentz, right? Because Phillip Rivers, obviously, we saw him in 2019. Like Steven just said, his arm is kind of cooked, right? They sort of unlock some of the middle parts of the field, get him on some, mesh stuff, some stuff he can easily hit, and then maybe once in a while he'll take a deep shot. Then Carson Wentz comes in the next year and he starts taking a lot more deep shots. Right. So Justin Herbert is clearly the most talented quarterback, aside from Andrew Luck, that Frank Reich, would have ever worked with. Right. And so in that sense, it's not just going to be like, oh, I did this in San Diego and that's what I'm going to do with Justin Herbert, or I did this with Phillip Rivers, that's what I'm going to do with Justin Herbert. He's going to unlock Justin Herbert kind of to a new level based on the things he already does and the things he knows Justin Herbert is talented enough to do. And that's just what Joe Lombardi wasn't able to do.
Yep. Well said.
All right, we'll get to some of our other candidates here. We'll kind of go through faster.
Do we want to go 6-2, I guess, or do we want to?
We can do the honorable mentions first. So okay. At least for me, I don't know about you guys, but I went about this a certain way, and I don't have any current offensive coordinators on my list. I think that's probably the way that you have to do things, just because the top tier offensive coordinators are getting head coaching jobs, and the other ones are sticking around and potentially being blocked from other hiring. So
I have one, but
that's totally fine. That's just the way that I kind of have viewed it. But so I'm gonna go my honorable mention first. I'm gonna go with Dan Pitcher. I've talked about him a bunch of times. He is the current quarterbacks coach for the Cincinnati Bengals. Just really quickly about him, I think one thing that's really cool, a diverse background. He started his career in the NFL as a scout and was actually supposedly able to climb that board if he wanted to. He was a scout for the Colts back in the day. Then he goes to be a quarterbacks coach. He's been quarterbacks coach for Marvin Lewis and Zach Taylor. So he's been able to have two different schemes. He's been able to major in the Sean McVay kind of offense that Zach Taylor runs. And, Joe Burrow has credited him with the implementation of all of the LSU concepts that they ran when he was a rookie. And so that says a lot to me in terms of his ability to work in different systems, do it well, work as a scout, do it well, and then also be able to, install different concepts and do that well. He's also held a clock management role with both coaching staffs in Cincinnati. So I think that's another one that I would like. And then I see Arjun in the chat here.
Yeah, that's what
number 5 for me is going to be Mike LaFleur, former passing game coordinator from the San Francisco 49ers, former offensive coordinator from the New York Jets. Brandon Staley talked a lot about, the principles of the Shanahan offense. And I think Mike LaFleur obviously got a little bit of the shaft working with the quarterback play, offensive line issues. But I think in terms of creativity, in terms of problem solving, in terms of, having a clear identity, I think Mike LaFleur would do a lot of good things with Justin Herbert. And obviously, a lot of people kind of pointing to him being kind of lock and step right now with the Rams opening. If you're him, why would you not go call plays for Justin Herbert as opposed to not calling plays with the Rams? So we have not seen Mike LaFleur officially hired by the Rams. And so until he is, I will have him on my list. And I think he would be a really, really good candidate as well.
Yeah.
All right. Tyler, you go next with honorable mention and number 6 or number 5.
Okay. For the sake of picking someone slightly different, I have Tanner Engstrand, the passing game coordinator and tight ends coach for the Lions. When Brandon Staley was talking about trying to, merge different things, the pass and the run, you may not just need a quarterbacks coach in this situation. And there are several good candidates, but someone who is a passing game coordinator, and for the Rams who, listen, I don't know, not the Rams, the Lions. I never would have thought, right, heading into this season that you'd want the passing game coordinator for the Lions with Jared Goff. But here we are where the Lions are, a top 6 or 7, whatever it is, drop back EPA team. Jared Goff was top 10 in drop back EPA per play or adjusted EPA per play. They're getting a lot out of him. And with the offensive coordinator, with the Lions staying, at some point, if the opportunity presents itself, you could, you can't be the offensive coordinator this year. He might have been the offensive coordinator if he left, but since he's staying, maybe go somewhere else and become an offensive coordinator. So, it's kind of a unique pick, I suppose. I don't see this name being thrown around a lot, but I mean, they got Jared Goff to play like that and that passing game to play like that. And they're doing kind of weird shit with Penei Sewell and all sorts of stuff. Like, bring it. The guy that was, the passing game coordinator for a good passing attack and the development of, or not development, but like resurrection of Jared Goff and the development of some receivers. I'm all for it. So I think Tanner Engstrand as an honorable mention is a guy for sure.
Hey man, anybody that will throw the ball to Rashawn Slater absolutely is worth worth some money, worth some interviews at least.
Exactly. My next, honestly, everyone between like Frank Reich and Tanner Engstrand, they're kind of in the same tier, so it really doesn't matter a whole lot to me. At number 5, I have Brian Johnson, the Eagles quarterback coach. Again, you talk about turning around Jalen Hurts, the way that they've used him, the way they've maximized him. They have a great staff over there, a really great system, it seems. But Brian Johnson, I'd love to have him over here. I think he's the only non-play caller or former play caller that I have in my top 5.
He has called plays in college.
Oh, well, sorry, I'm NFL play caller.
Yeah, so I'll get to Brian here in a second.
Okay.
Alex, welcome back. Hopefully, all good there.
Yep.
In case you missed it, Tanner Engstrand, the Lions passing game coordinator and tight ends coach, and then obviously Eagles quarterbacks coach Brian Johnson. So, who's your honorable mention, and then number 5 on your list?
I was close to having Tanner Engstrand on. I considered him. My honorable mention is Georgia offensive coordinator Todd Monken. Has offensive coordinator experience, is experienced, at the NFL level as opposed to just the college level or, just like the offensive coordinator level, like some of these guys. So for me, I went with him. I put him in the honorable mentions category because I don't really think it's a possibility. I don't know if the Chargers are going to go, let's go pay an offensive coordinator $2 billion. And that's what Todd Monken's price currently is at Georgia. So right now, I think it's a less likely option. But if Staley's really serious about like, hey, I want a guy who's, who has some experience and can kind of be in my ear, Monken's a very experienced guy and has been coaching for, 20, 30 years at this point. So for me, and everyone sees what Georgia's passing game is, not in quite the same vein as like Joe Brady a couple of years ago, but man, like the shit he's doing with fucking Stetson Bennett, it's like it's insane.
That's a hell of an ace card, man.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that to me is just like insane in terms of like creating your offense. And obviously, if you could do that with Stetson Bennett, obviously you're doing that with a bunch of 15 stars at Georgia, but you could do that at the pro level, and I do trust in his ability to kind of scheme things open as well. So number 5 is my more outside the box pick that I talked about on Twitter. I'm going to go with an Eagle. However, it is not Brian Johnson. It is run game coordinator and offensive lines coach Jeff Stoutland.
I love that pick. I didn't think they would do it. I don't think they would do it, but
No.
I love that pick. I was looking at it too.
I don't think they would do it.
Stoutland University, for those who like the Sunday Night Football introductions from Jordan Mailata.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, this is sort of in the vein of what Tyler was talking about. I mean, he tweeted the Frank Smith thing today, and sort of that's like kind of the vibe you got from the press conference of like, you just kind of want a guy who can like reset the offensive line a little bit, improve the run game. That's fucking Jeff Stoutland, dude. I mean, he's been through the Eagles through 3 coaching administrations since Chip Kelly. He's still around coaching the offensive line. And the run game is obviously, self-explanatory. It's the best run game in the league. It's the best offensive line in the league. And if the Chargers could get any degree of that, it would be awesome. Now, he's been the run game coordinator, I believe, since 2018, offensive line coach since 2013. So, I mean, look, he has the experience to make the jump to play caller if he really wanted to. I don't know if he'll want to. He might be comfortable with the job he has in Philadelphia, and I don't know if the Chargers would really consider it. But in terms of like that guy that Staley was talking about to, basically reset the run game, reset the offensive line, there's no better pick in the league than Jeff Stoutland in that regard. So if you're looking for a guy who, if you're fine with Herbert where he is now in terms of his, he's a top 5 quarterback and you just want to fix everything else around Herbert, that to me is like a pretty good pick to do that.
Man, I'm disappointed that I am not the one who thought.
Yeah,
the
I picked the offensive line
coaches.
guy, baby.
I was reading Albert Breer today too, and Albert Breer was saying that Sean McVay's thinking about reaching out to Bill Callahan and getting him as the offensive coordinator in LA. And I'm like, damn, that would be really nice. Bill Callahan as an offensive coordinator too, and Jeff Stoutland is another one. So I think that would be really good. All right, so Alex has Todd Monken at honorable mention. I have him at number 4 for me. I think there is a slight possibility that Brandon Staley would be able to pull that higher off. I mean, he loves the Georgia program. He has a great relationship with Kirby Smart. Todd Monken is generating some buzz in the NFL, and if you're him, why would you not go work and call plays with Justin Herbert as opposed to like calling plays for the Patriots or calling plays for, all these other teams, the Jets? Like, why would he want to go to work there? So I think there is a good amount of possibilities there. So he's called plays at, a variety of stops, college and NFL, which I think is very valuable. He's been a receivers coach in the NFL. He's been a quarterbacks coach in the NFL. He's done all of that in college football as well. So he's never been a head coach, but I think that's as close as you can get. I think that would help Brandon Staley quite a bit. And then, you want Brandon Staley to get an identity in offense, man. Like, what's more identity than Georgia offense right now? Yeah. Fast, physical. We're going to do 2 tight ends. We're going to do a lot of RPOs, push the ball vertically, and we're just going to, out athlete you. Granted, I don't know how you can out athlete in the NFL, but, I think he would have a clear vision for what he would want, with the Chargers offense. So Todd Monken is that for me. Number 3, I've changed up my order a little bit here. I'm going Brian Johnson, my guy, at number 3. And then I'm going to go with Joe Brady at number 2. So Joe Brady is my consolation prize for Frank Reich, if you want to call it that. So just since, Brian Johnson is I assume going to be mentioned by Alex as well. So he has called plays. He's called plays at Utah, of course. He's called plays at the University of Houston, at the University of Florida as well. So you want to talk about somebody who has a diverse background. I mean, he called plays for a power run game at the University of Utah. He called plays for the air raid at Houston, called plays with a 2 quarterback system with Kyle Trask at quarterback at the University of Florida. He's done some great work, obviously, with Jalen Hurts recently. So, he checks that mobile quarterback box that I'm looking for. He's been able to be around Nick Sirianni, Shane Steichen, and just the way that unit solves problems and has different game plans for each specific week, I think is something that I'm very interested in. It's a little biased. Of course, he's a Utah guy. I really had him at number 2, but I felt like, I had to kind of take as much bias out of it as I could. So that's why I put Joe Brady at number 2. Again, somebody that I think could come in and have some similar verbiage to what the Chargers have had, hit from his days with the Saints. But at the same time, he goes to LSU and it's a lot of empty sets. It's a lot of similar air raid principles. I mean, he allowed Joe Burrow to run the football a little bit more, a lot of shotgun run game. Then he goes to Carolina, does just kind of his own thing. And it didn't necessarily work out super great. Granted, he was calling plays for, Sam Darnold and Teddy Bridgewater and Cam Newton. So, I don't necessarily know if he's like a get more out of less guy. But I think it's just the schematic portfolio for me that he's able to draw upon, which is really, why I'd be interested in him. I mean, now he's in Buffalo and it's a lot of vertical stress on teams, right? And so I think schematically he checks the most boxes for me outside of Frank Reich.
Yeah, no, that's great. Obviously I have Joe Brady on my list at some point too. I love that there's a variety of experiences there. Joe Lombardi tried to go to the Lions, it didn't work out, and you go back to the Saints. So there was no like differentiation at that point for him. It's just kind of working with the same system. And hey, for a while that system worked for where they were at. But someone like Joe Brady, a variety of experiences there. That's great.
Oh, should I go next or?
Sure. It was Tyler next, but either way.
That's cool.
Okie dokie. All right, I will go. Okay, at number 4, I have Mike LaFleur. I cannot type sideways to save my life today. There you go, Mike LaFleur. At number 3, I do have Joe Brady. And at number 2, I only have to include him because they have not told me no yet. So until they tell me no, I'm going to keep including Frank Smith, who today, I don't think it's possible, but it is kind of. So I guess I do think it's possible that if the Dolphins do allow this, that Frank Smith could be, allowed to go and become the actual play caller, maybe the assistant head coach or whatever. If you want to talk about today and what Staley was talking about in his coordinators, he wanted someone who could solve the run game, someone who could adjust for blocking schemes, someone who can pressure the defense with uniqueness and pre-snap motion. And Frank Smith, from either his experience with the Chargers or the offense he was at with the Dolphins, has that. I mean, Arjun sent me a graph, and I think he posted it as well. I don't remember whose graph it was, so I apologize. But the Dolphins had one of the most unique schemes in the NFL, and they also had, they were top. I think they were 9th in pre-snap motion last year. So that, I think, it checks so many boxes, and we've seen what Frank Smith can do with this team. So if for some reason they're able to poach him, I think that'd be fantastic. Mike LaFleur, you already talked about Joe Brady, so I'll kind of talk more about Mike LaFleur. Not a slam dunk candidate because there's always that asterisk of, you looked at the Jets. It's not like they were the greatest offense of all time.
Right.
But I do think, he kind of moves up the list because of what Brandon Staley said today, which is, look at my background and see, who I might have worked with or the systems that I kind of worked with before.
Right.
And I think LaFleur could definitely be someone that they try to get the first time and they might come back around this time. We'll see what they end up doing or what he ends up doing. But I think it's definitely possible. If you look at where his scheme is clustered, it's very much with some of the best rushing teams in the league this past year in EPA per play. So you have like the Falcons, for example, the Packers, the Bears. That's kind of a Justin Fields thing. Really good running teams there. And they also, I think, had the third most pre-snap motion in the NFL last year. So you get, not a unique scheme, but a good run scheme. And you saw what they did with Breece Hall. Get a lot of pre-snap motion. There's a familiarity there. He's called plays before. And instead of Zach Wilson, you get Justin Herbert. So I think there's just a lot to like there.
Yeah, and he was definitely not afraid to push the ball down the field with Zach Wilson. So I think that helps. In terms of Frank Smith, man, if I knew that he were available and the Dolphins were not blocking him, I think he would be right behind Joe Brady, in my opinion. Joe Brady obviously has that edge in play calling experience, but Frank Smith, I think, a diverse candidate. He majors in the Sean Payton, John Gruden kind of West Coast traditional offense. He comes to the Chargers and he's the run game coordinator, and Brandon Staley wants him to install a lot of wide zone Kyle Shanahan run concepts. And he does that. He does it at an extremely high level as a run game coordinator. And then he goes to Miami and Mike McDaniel. It's a lot of San Francisco offense. So, he's had a variety of experiences, a variety of roles. He's been a tight ends coach. He's been a run game coordinator, an offensive line coach. He's been an offensive coordinator. It's just the fact that the Dolphins, I think, would presumably just block any kind of interview candidate. So if I knew that he were available, he would absolutely be in my top 3, in my opinion. So, all right, Alex, we'll get to your final picks here, and then we'll wrap the show up tonight.
What are the rules regarding whether they can block it or not? They can block anything that's not a promotion.
Yeah, so it's a lateral move. So any offensive coordinator who any other team wants to interview could be blocked, even if it's a non-play calling situation.
Yeah,
so Frank Smith is not calling
that was
plays.
The question I had, because I'm pretty sure that's right, that you can't, they can still block it even if he's not calling plays in Miami, right? So that obviously they would probably choose to block it, right?
Yeah.
So
you used to be able to block like any move, right? Like you used to be able to have Mike McDaniel as your run game coordinator and say, hey, Chargers, no, you're not going to be able to hire this guy as your offensive coordinator. Now you can only block for lateral moves is the new thing.
Yeah. Getting to my list, I have 4 Mike LaFleur, 3 I have Joe Brady, 2 I have Brian Johnson. So kind of a flip-flop order of the same guys that Steven and Tyler have, but yeah, I mean, I think those 3 candidates pop up on lists for different reasons. I mean, Mike LaFleur, obviously, I mean, people could say what they want about the Jets, and obviously that was a rotating door in and out of quarterbacks. I think through like the first 3 games of the season this year, Joe Flacco like was second or third in the NFL in passing yards. So if you want to say that,
Did some good things with Mike White.
Right. Yeah. As far as, getting the ball down the field, like, Michael Fuller is not afraid to do that, regardless of who his quarterback is, whether that's Joe Flacco or Mike White, and a little bit more challenging with Zach Wilson. But yeah, I think that Mike LaFleur is a good candidate. Obviously comes from, kind of that Shanahan vibe that Staley is looking for. And he does have some offensive coordinator experience over the last 2 years. So, I mean, that is a kind of a plus on his resume if he's looking for his like second job in that regard. I went with Joe Brady number 3. Yeah, pretty self-explanatory. I mean, you are looking to push the ball down the field. You're, looking for an offense that's going to pop, and Joe Brady did that at LSU. Didn't do it as successfully or wasn't replicated as well in Carolina, but Carolina also, kind of like the Jets this year, the year that Brady was the offense coordinator, was, like Steven said, kind of a mess at quarterback, but he maximized certain things about that offense still. And you give Joe Brady the kind of keys to the Ferrari that he had at LSU, and he can make it run, because we saw that he was able to do that. So obviously, he's a young up and comer. I went Brian Johnson number 2. You could kind of flip it in whatever order you wanted. But for me, I just think the way that he's maximized quarterbacks really like goes to him here. I know Steven mentioned Kyle Trask. There's Jalen Hurts. And of course, you also have to mention Dak Prescott from his time at Mississippi State. And obviously, we've seen what Dak Prescott's turned into since, as a 4th round pick, who's now, a top 10 quarterback in the league. So, you're looking at what, that development there, turning Kyle Trask into a Heisman candidate, turning Jalen Hurts to an MVP candidate. I mean, the list kind of goes long in terms of what he can do with the quarterback's mechanics and maximize that, all of them. And over, some of the other candidates who don't have play calling experience, on any of our lists, he does, have the play calling experience quotient, or at least some experience doing that in college, which, is relative to the resume, but or should be something that is considered when comparing him with potential other offensive like analysts, hirings that haven't like jumped into the fray yet, or offensive assistants that haven't jumped into the play calling fray. Brian Johnson kind of already has that. So, he's kind of ready to rock from day one. Only reason I kind of view him as potentially unlikely, if it is true that Shane Steichen is the favorite in Carolina, then obviously Brian Johnson would have a very easy path to promotion in Philadelphia. And, then Staley would kind of have to convince him, well, why do you come to the Chargers if you can just take the Eagles job, which is what he would do. Right. So kind of is incumbent on Shane Steichen staying in Philadelphia. But yeah, Brian Johnson would be my number 2 candidate, in the same vein of Frank Reich, if he is truly available for this job.
Yeah, I think that's a similar vibe for a lot of these,
right,
quarterbacks coaches, right? Like you can talk about Shea Tierney, who's the quarterbacks coach in New York, and if Mike Kafka gets a head coaching job, like he's starting to pick up steam, and rightfully so. Shea Tierney, who's been with Brian Dable at Buffalo and at the University of Alabama, is probably that next offensive coordinator line. So I think he's another worthwhile candidate. He's a little too green for me personally. I think he's only been a quarterback's coach for 1 official year, which is this year in New York with Brian Dable. But I do think that would be an attractive thing. And then Zach Robinson, another one who's been commonly floated out there by several people. Similar feelings for me. I think he's still probably a year away before I would feel comfortable with him as like a legitimate offensive coordinator candidate. He's only been the quarterback's coach, like the only quarterback's coach in with the Rams for this past season, and it was really hard to see like where was his influence when everybody was injured. I mean, Matt Stafford played 8 games or whatever it was. So Zach Robinson and Shea Tierney I think are worth mentioning, but for me I think those two are a little too green for me at this point.
Yeah, other honorable mentions. It's well, half the list I feel like I deleted because of different reasons. Like Daryl Bevel's returning, it seems. Matt Weiss is in some legal water, so there goes that one. Some people mentioned Matt
Unfortunately
Nagy.
for Arjun.
Yes, unfortunately for Arjun, he was big on Matt Weiss, and I would have too. There was a lot of reasons to like him, but not happening now. No one mentioned, I don't think, Pep Hamilton. That is a possibility, I suppose. I would even be down for Stump Mitchell, the run game coordinator for the Browns, because why not? Let's get a 63-year-old run game coordinator for the Browns. At least that's a good run scheme. Like the Browns would run the shit out of the football, and they were top 5 in I think the EPA per play for that. So he's 63 years old. Not that that's anything wrong. I just I don't know what their perspective is on bringing in offensive coordinators who haven't really had any play calling experience before. But hey, if you're going to get a run game going, be like the Browns, except for the quarterback thing.
Except for the quarterback thing. That's exactly right. Alex, any other candidate that you thought about? I see somebody put in Jason Garrett.
Yeah, I put in Jason Garrett, and I'm putting him in as the least honorable mention. He's there on the sheet. And the only thing that I would submit is what has happened with, Daniel Jones in New York. With Brian Dable.
Yeah.
Jason Garrett had that offense, I think, bottom 2 both of the years that he was offensive coordinator.
Yeah.
Which pretty hard to do. That's almost as impressive as being top 2 in an opposite way. But yeah, Jason Garrett, absolutely terrible. Someone mentioned him in the chat, so I had to get him in. Absolutely no chance. Even though the Chargers did interview him for the head coaching job 2 years ago. Don't see him succeeding in the search this time.
Yeah, definitely not. He's doing things at NBC, I guess. Yeah, I think these Jesus, Tyler.
Where's Deuce Gruden? Is he still available? Where's Jay?
Oh man, I would say I thought about Deuce Staley too. Deuce Staley is the running backs coach, run game coordinator in Detroit. He's somebody that I thought about putting on my list as well.
Former Eagle too. Yeah. No, I don't think any of the Grudens are currently employed anymore.
Jay Gruden is a consultant for the Rams right now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So there you go. All right. Tyler, Alex, any other final thoughts before we call it a night?
Who do we think is most likely in terms of what the Chargers want?
I think Mike LaFleur would be pretty high on Brandon Staley's list. He has an existing relationship with Zach Robinson, and I think that would also be high on his list. Daniel Popper put Nathaniel Hackett in his list. The hardest of passes on Nathaniel Hackett as offensive coordinator.
Yeah, I would say LaFleur or Reich at this point. LaFleur in the sense that he's probably going to be available regardless, right? I don't think he's jumping to take another offensive coordinator job that's not the Chargers at this point, right? He'd kind of be like a clubhouse leader for that one, right? And then Reich is obviously, if he is available, depending on the results of the head coaching search, but if Brandon Staley kind of wants the most slam dunk thing there's an existing relationship there between him and the Chargers. I think that one is very high up, and Chris Mortensen and other analysts wouldn't be putting that out there if it wasn't already like a thing too, like in league circles, in terms of what Reich will do if he doesn't get a head coaching job. So I do think that is kind of out there for a reason.
Yeah, no, I agree with you guys.
In terms of the timeline here, I would expect we start hearing about some interviews probably tomorrow, or at least some requests. We'll see kind of how this plays out, but it generally takes at least a week for a coordinator hiring like this. The Browns hired their new defensive coordinator, Jeff Schwartz, in basically a week. So I would expect by like next Friday, we at least have like a good idea of the direction that they're trending in. Brandon Staley said that they'll take their time. Of course, they're going to cast a wide net. This is no mistake about it, the best offensive coordinator position opening in the NFL right now, because you get to work with Justin Herbert. You're essentially one year away from becoming a head coach if you get this right. So, I will say that as well. So, yeah, we'll keep you guys posted over the next couple weeks how this goes and who this coaching hire works out. So excited to see what comes of this. Hopefully Brandon Staley is able to pull off a good hire. Obviously, this is the most important decision of his career. He's got to get this offensive coordinator hiring right and be able to get Justin Herbert in the offense back on track. So appreciate all you guys in the chat. Like I said earlier, please leave us a rating or a review. Please subscribe, like this video, and let us know who you guys want. The Popper's here. Hey, we got Daniel Popper in the chat.
Wait,
What
Daniel
is
Popper's in the
up?
chat?
Yeah, we got Daniel Popper in the chat.
Is it
that
Daniel Popper or is it a Daniel Popper?
Wait, is it the real Daniel Popper?
Are you the real Daniel
No.
Popper?
Will the real Popper please stand up?
Wait, what's a way we can ask?
How do we verify this?
I don't think we can.
What are you drinking right now?
Oh, he just makes something up.
What's on your SoundCloud?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, there you go.
Describe music production.
Describe music production.
Do a tutorial real quick for us to learn how to make a track. I don't think it's him.
Ooh, well,
Sauv Blanc. I assume that's a drink.
I assume that's
Alex.
a drink. Yeah, Sauvignon Blanc, bro. You never heard? Well, yeah, I mean, you never heard because yeah, but
We're just here talking to either a real or fake, or probably fake Daniel Popper. So
someone in the YouTube can click on that profile and see if it's real or not. So, I mean, do that for us. I don't know.
Somebody can do it on YouTube. Can I do it on YouTube?
We can't do it from the chat, but you can do it from YouTube.
it's not him.
It's not him. The real Daniel Popper and I are going to have a chat at some point in the next few days about all of this. So I appreciate Popper for for tuning in tonight, I guess. But you'll all of you will get to hear what the real Daniel Popper has to say in the next few days.
We'll confirm with him as to whether this was the real Daniel Popper or not. In the
All right, that's gonna do it for us today, guys. We'll talk to you soon.
2:30, baby.